Yeah, I got a bunch of those guys. Today on
Doomed!
we're debunking the Holocaust Deniers with Dr. Andrew E. Mathis. He's an adjunct professor of humanities at the University of the Sciences in Philadelphia, who tracks the conspiracy theorists at his website, Holocaust Controversies. I'm your host, Matt Binder, and this is Doomed. All right, let's bring down the song. Let's bring us up on the camera here. Bum, bum, bum. There we go. Andrew, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Now, you've been actually, let's give people a little bit of background here. Full disclosure, you have been a longtime listener of mine, but not of this show, from my time on the Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
That's right. Yeah. For probably, I guess, going on. Well, how long have you been gone, for one thing?
It's been a while now that I've been gone, but oh man.
When I started watching, you and Michael were there, but Kelly was not.
Okay,
that
so
should give you some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was sometime between the years 2011 and 20. Well, if Michael was there, then sometimes between the years of 2012 and 2015.
Right.
So yeah, you're an old timer.
An old timer, right?
All right. And as you called me when you picked up the phone, old Matt, as I'm known to the Majority Report audience, which I responded to you. It's becoming literal now as I age and look like I do today. Well, anyway, let's get serious now, because we're about to get into some heavy stuff. The show is called Doomed, although I would say I do a pretty good job of not making everyone feel like we should all just go off and live in an underground bunker when I end the show. But anyway, the show is called Doomed, and you reached out to me, and I've been looking at your work, and it's Holocaust Remembrance Day, and you have been basically tracking these conspiracy theorists, these fringe figures who, I mean, the most straightforward thing to describe them as they're Holocaust deniers.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is something that you would used to hear someone say this and, bring up some of these things you're about to tell us about. And most people would say automatically, what you would think was these people are nuts, out of their mind, something is wrong with them.
Yeah.
But in recent years, we've seen some of these people who hold some of these very same views. Maybe they're known for other things than just being Holocaust deniers, but some of these people are now in the mainstream right. And And not only that, not only straight up Holocaust denialism, but, we have folks, just today, just to bring up a current event, speaking of this stuff, Facebook basically banned about half a dozen people who range from Alex Jones to Farrakhan to Laura Loomer.
Noted far leftist Louis Farrakhan.
Right, yes. Paul Nealon, Milo Yiannopoulos, Prison Paul Joseph Watson. I would say there's a few of these names who have dabbled in this sort of, at least the same realm as Holocaust deniers. I mean, hell, bring up Candace Owens, who just left Turning Point USA just a few weeks ago, or maybe it was a month ago, max, where she's out there saying, if Hitler didn't move outside of Germany, he wouldn't have been such a bad guy.
Right.
This may not, maybe she's not the same as some of the folks you're about to tell me, but it's certainly well within the realm. And maybe, if I'm being kind, a step or two away from full on being that.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely true. I mean, Watson actually sort of like, he went over to the dark side relatively recently, in terms of being right out there as a Holocaust denier. He was kind of on the precipice for a while, and he took the great leap within the last year, actually sort of openly taking a position. Him and Ron Unz actually was the other one that was that had been kind of playing around with it for a while and came out and openly stated a position. Unz is a weird case too, because he's Jewish on top of it, and so there's a very small minority among this group of people that are Jewish. The vast majority are not. But Unz was sort of like the most recent figure on my radar to go over and openly state that he was as he styles himself, like a skeptic.
Right. So let's actually, you know probably as much as I know about far-right fringe movements. I would say most of my knowledge is within the modern right. I would say maybe the past 10, 15, maybe 20 years. But this specific area, Holocaust denial and the deniers who've built this movement, I mean, go back probably to when it was happening, when the Holocaust was actually, going on during World War II. Please give us a bit of history behind where these conspiracy theories come from. Sort of who were the earliest names denying what was going on in Nazi Germany at the time, and let's just start there actually before I throw 20 more questions at you, because I got a lot.
Yeah. So as you point out, I mean the denial begins while the crimes are still going on, but once the war is over and the Nazis have lost, and some of them are in custody, a lot of them are put on trial at Nuremberg, a few were put on trial elsewhere. The denial starts there, but it's really difficult for a lot of them to just sort of like flat out deny that anything has happened, so much as to say that they weren't personally involved or they didn't know what was going on, those kinds of things. But almost immediately after the war, there is a strand of these people that make their way into the European far right, almost immediately, really, because a lot of them end up, first of all, obviously, we all know about the ones that end up in Latin America. But also a fairly large number of them end up in Spain, because although Franco has not cooperated with the Nazis really at all during the war, he's open to the idea of giving them shelter in Spain and not sending them back to be put on trial. So a lot of the high-ranking SS guys, particularly the ones that are Catholic, end up in Spain, and they begin sort of setting up far-right networks pretty much immediately after the war. And a lot of those guys are deniers. There's German politician Otto Ernst Remmer. He's one of the earliest, first generation ones. Former a guy from Wallonia who was in the Waffen SS, Leon de Grelle. He's and they're out there sort of making their case from Spain, or for Remmer, he's actually in Germany and gets in sort of big trouble, making the case that if at the very least, it's been completely overblown. That the number of Jews that have been killed is massively overestimated, and that moreover, for those Jews that were killed, that that it was absolutely a matter of anti-partisan warfare. Germany had a legitimate grievance against the Jews, that kind of thing, and so they're sort of circulating on the far right and not getting a lot of mileage until really sort of two things happen. The first one is in the United States. There's a guy, Francis Parker Yockey is his name. And he actually he drifts over to the far right at some point during the war, but ends up working on the Nuremberg trials after the war. And he sort of goes there on his own personal initiative as like a mole to go over there and try to actually help out the people that he's supposed to be prosecuting. He sets up these sort of very extensive networks in the far right in Europe, comes back to the United States, and is arrested for traveling on a false passport. He gets thrown into jail, and the visitor that he gets while he's in jail is a guy named Willis Carto. Willis Carto is like the godfather of the far right post-World War II in the United States. He just died last year, but he's the guy that puts Holocaust denial on the map in the United States. And he's able to sort of leverage his relationship with Yockey into a much more extensive relationship on the far right throughout Europe and North and South America. That's one. Two is the emergence, first in the 60s in France, a guy named Paul Racinier, who actually had been a member of the French resistance during the war. He had been arrested by the Gestapo, put in Mittelbau-Dora, a prison camp in France, and then began in the 60s writing books, basically saying like, I've been in Nazi concentration camps and I didn't see any gas chambers, that kind of thing. And he's like expelled from the Communist Party. He was actually in the parliament at one point in France. He was expelled from the parliament. He doesn't get a lot of reverberation for what he's doing until he finds this sort of very publicly vocal acolyte, a guy named Robert Faurisson. And Faurisson also died last year. And he's the person that actually brings Holocaust denial public. And he and Carto have a long cooperative relationship where they're both publishing Holocaust denial material in Europe and in the United States, setting up conferences. Carto sets up the Institute for Historical Review in the United States. Faurisson is a very common guest for the IHR to speak at their conferences. And they begin to attract around them a kind of a clique of people who are generating this material. The vast majority of them are on the very far right. A couple of them are able to sort of put out an outward appearance of being apolitical. There's a professor of electrical engineering at Northwestern, a guy named Arthur Butts, and he publishes a book in the late 70s called The Hoax of the 20th Century. And this is one of the sort of the most important pieces of Holocaust denial literature that's ever published, because he has some air of respectability because he doesn't have any sort of outward Nazi trappings about him, and he's actually a legitimate professor at a very good university with tenure, so of course he can't get in any trouble.
Right.
But he's willing to sort of make this public case. And right around the time that Butts publishes, David Irving, who over in England has been for a couple of decades at that point a major right-wing historian of Nazi Germany, but very much still in the mainstream. He publishes a book in 1977 called Hitler's War. And in Hitler's War, he puts forward this thesis that Hitler didn't know about the Holocaust, that it was essentially being carried out by people against his wishes, on the independent initiative of people that were essentially trying to keep this undertaking from him. And Irving's project from that point forward is exonerating Hitler. It's that the Nazis might have done bad things, but really, if you line Hitler up against Churchill in particular, that Hitler really is the far more reputable character of these two. And over a course of about 15 to 20 years, Irving begins to sort of sink deeper and deeper into it, particularly as he alienates more and more of his mainstream publishing counterparts, until finally he loses a book contract in the early 90s. He has a contract with St. Martin's Press. They're going to publish his biography of Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister. They pull out basically because there's enormous pressure from like the ADL and groups like that. And he sort of publicly declares his disbelief in the Holocaust sort of outright at that point. And that's also a very important moment because it's right around that very same time that the World Wide Web is really exploding and people are getting online. And Irving has a very good reputation as a historian. So, and plus he's cooperated with the IHR. He's come to their conferences. He's done the whole, rubber chicken circuit with those people. So he's been living in both worlds at this point. But now, sort of the fans of military history that have been reading Irving for years are going to get drawn into it. The sort of the classic far right circle, who's already into it now, can sort of embrace Irving fully as a kind of vehicle toward greater legitimacy. Because I mean, Irving's the kind of guy that has his books reviewed in the New York Review of Books. He's a big deal. So at least back then. So. It's really between the time that he loses that book contract and the time that he sues Deborah Lipstadt for libel, which is in the late 90s, that there's like a crescendo of Holocaust denial activity. And it really peaks then when Irving loses that trial. It dips. But then after 9/11, it really peaks again, probably as a consequence of all the conspiracy theories that's tied into that.
Now, let's actually, what I find really interesting, actually, and you brought it up, is how this sort of moved to, how it sort of, it's almost like it has its own secondary movement in Latin America, like you mentioned. Can you go a little bit more into the history behind that?
Yeah, it's not something I can talk a lot about because I'm not very strong on it. But the figure actually that it sort of centers around the most is Adolf Eichmann, of course, because he's the at the end of the war, and particularly after the Nuremberg trials when the major figures have been executed. Eichmann is the last man standing in terms of the of command responsibility for the Holocaust. Eichmann is the guy, and he's at large, and he makes sort of the really foundational error of not keeping a low enough profile. He does an interview with a far right Dutch. I'm not going to remember the guy's name. Unfortunately, Sasson is the guy's name. Willem Sasson does an interview with him that gets circulated in Life magazine, for instance. And so even before the Israelis lay their hands on him in '60, I guess, he's already sort of popped up on the radar. And to some extent, the far right movement, he's maintained ties with the far right movement all along in Europe. Although he can't travel, obviously, there are far right figures that are going back and forth. There's a political figure in Argentina. There's important to sort of stipulate. I mean, there are a lot of German Argentinians, and so there's a fair amount of travel that goes back and forth between those countries. Political figures are mobilizing. Perón has a big base of support in the far right, even though he's not technically really far right himself. Like Franco, however, he gives like a safe harbor for these people, mainly just kind of to stick it to the United States and to the UK, probably more than anything else. But Eichmann becomes a kind of rallying point. Because when Eichmann, and it's a little bit sort of counterintuitive, because when Eichmann comes forward, he doesn't deny that he did anything. I mean, he denies any personal responsibility, just saying, his job was, to sign a manifest of people being put on trains. And by and large, that's true. But at the same time, he's not claiming that there were no exterminations. He's just claiming that it was a necessary part of what he had been asked to do. After all, Germany's war was against Bolshevism, and the Jews were carriers of the Bolshevik idea. And so, of course, a war against Bolshevism to the death was going to mean the death of of millions of Jews, and he stood by what he had done. And so, and I guess sort of the point about Eichmann and this thing that's happening in the late 50s, early 60s, is that a significant proportion of the people that deny the Holocaust are perfectly aware that it happened, and so they're looking to have. To legitimize a particular point of view that will be useful for rehabilitating the Nazis politically. So that's one part of what they're doing. But at the same time, they feel perfectly comfortable championing somebody who says, look, the Jews were all communists, we had to take care of them, because that's, after all, the way that they really feel. So in some sense, they're kind of trying to have their cake and eat it too. But there's a certain amount of dishonesty there that they really sort of know what actually happened and are really denying it as a kind of political thing. The movement itself, Holocaust denial within South America, is really, I would say, like tertiary behind the one in the United States and the one in Europe.
Right. I always just found it, because when I was, going back to my high school years, I think, or before I was, I was into politics at the time, but I barely knew, things like that. And I remember just watching a soccer game with a buddy, same age, and he's just pointing out all the German people on the Argentina team, all the people with German names on the Argentina team or something. And he's like, you know why that is, right? And then from that moment, I was like, that's crazy.
I mean, there was a huge exodus that happened of people in the SS that took place. I mean, it was facilitated largely by the Vatican, and these people got funneled through the Vatican and found safe harbor. A very large number, obviously, in Latin America, but as I mentioned before, a large number in Spain and Portugal too, because these were authoritarian, right-wing, very Catholic states, and with good relationships with the Vatican. And the idea here was, and it sort of is contiguous with the stuff we've been talking about already. The standpoint of the Vatican during the war, by and large, was that the Nazis were the lesser of two evils, because even though what they were doing was awful, the communists were worse because they were anti-religion. And if it meant having to take a side in a war between the Nazis and the Soviets, they were going to choose the Nazis because the Nazis, and this was actually even a mistaken idea, because the Nazis would have moved against the church at some point. But they were at least operating on the mistaken ideal that the Nazis wouldn't, but the Soviets certainly would. And so a fight against the Soviet Union was a fight to keep religion viable in Europe. And so they chose their sides. And when the war ended, they wanted to be sure that those people who they saw as fighting this holy crusade against communism were going to pay with their lives. And that's why they did what they did, and why all those war criminals ended up in South America.
Right. So let's now... So how did this... Let's start moving towards, I guess, where we are today. So how did it go from that... how did those figures basically bring this into... what really is, how did it move into what we see currently in current day? I mean, we're literally just days removed from one synagogue shooting among, I don't even know how many there have been. There's been the one in Pittsburgh, and then the most recent one. And there's no doubt about it that, all these, again, these white supremacists might, some of them might not deny the Holocaust, but they're all in the same realm, like I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
So how did we get here, basically?
The internet's a big part of it. It's a very big part of it. And because, before there was, internet access in every home, it was very much a fringe movement. I think that you could literally count on the knuckles of a single finger the number of Holocaust deniers that held advanced history degrees. And so they had no legitimacy whatsoever in academia, and they were completely ignored there. I mentioned Butts before, but he's an electrical engineer, and so as long as he was tenured, so he could be dead wood in engineering and just publish Holocaust denial stuff, and he would be largely ignored. And as long as he didn't bring any of it into his classroom, he stayed good with Northwestern. But the rest of these people, they would, they'd come to these meetings and they'd circulate their literature pretty much among themselves. The far right, the neo-Nazi parties that would pop up every now and then, and the KKK, they would be, useful conduits for getting that stuff out. But it really didn't reverberate very much at all. Not to the extent, for instance, that Faurisson did in the 70s in France. And to some extent, France was just a better kind of ground for that kind of thing. I don't know what you know about French politics, but basically French politics has been divided on the issue of anti-Semitism since the 1880s. Right. And it pretty much remains that way. I mean, it's the pro-Dreyfusards on the left, the anti-Dreyfusards on the right, and their positions on this treason trial that happens in the 1880s. So I mean, Faurisson playing into all of that stuff. I mean, all that stuff gets it gets whipped up into an absolute frenzy during the war. It dies down a little bit afterward. And it's difficult for people on the far right in France to make sort of a vocal presentation of their points of view because of the heroism of the resistance, which is very closely tied to the left in France. But with Faurisson, who, by the way, I don't think I mentioned this before, he's a professor of literature at the University of Paris. So he's a legitimate academic figure, although, again, not an historian. He is now sort of presenting this material in a way that is giving it sort of a veneer of respectability. And actually sort of what does a little bit more damage, and it's a sort of one of these episodes in this whole area that gets played up in the wrong way, I think. But it's actually Noam Chomsky plays an unwittingly bad role in this when he's asked by a mutual friend of his and Faurisson to write an introduction to one of Faurisson's books, and he does, without sort of realizing the gravity of what it is that he's done. After which, of course, he renounces it and says that the guy's free to say what he wants, but he's an idiot for saying it, and so on and so forth. But that brings much greater attention in the United States to the issue than it would have otherwise. Anti-Semitism in France is, it's pretty much constant. Faurisson, caused like an uptick of it, and then it dies down again. It doesn't really get consistently sort of buoyed to the extent that that can explain what we see now until the internet, because it's like anything else. It provides community for people that wouldn't otherwise have it. So, if you're some neo-Nazi, someplace in the middle of the United States, and you think the Holocaust is a great big hoax, good for you. I mean, but who are you going to share that idea with?
Would you say that, between the time of, I guess, like you were giving the history earlier, around the time of the Holocaust and right after, and then between the age of the internet, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s, when everyone starts to have it, at least in the US, would you say the time in between, like the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, it's sort of a dying sort of movement, or like how would you characterize the time in between, or is it sort of just like clinging on to? It clings to life.
It clings to life, but just barely. I mean, it's just a tiny little percentage of people that are out there doing it.
Right.
I mean, they can't even really get traction among like the neo-Nazi set, because among the neo-Nazi set, you've got a big proportion of people who are like 6 million more. Like they want to hang their hat on the fact that the Nazis killed millions of Jews. They're proud of it, and they want it to be something that they can sort of follow up on by seizing power again. They see Holocaust denial as idiotic because, let's face it, the Nazis lost the war. So if there's no Holocaust, then they really didn't accomplish anything from their standpoint. So the Holocaust deniers can't even really get traction among these people. Now that said, I mean, I can remember when I first encountered Holocaust denial. I was in my early 20s, so like almost 30 years ago. And it was a talk show host on local talk radio here in Philadelphia, a guy named Irv Homer, who since has passed away. He had on two guys. He had on August Kreis, who later went on to be the head of Aryan Nations, and who actually now is in prison for raping his daughter. And he had Mark Thomas, who was a Christian identity preacher from Allentown. He went to prison he joined the Aryan Republican Army, and he went to prison for some relationship with one of the people involved in Oklahoma City bombing. And these two guys were both talking Holocaust denial. But they were in the small minority of people at that point in the far right who were espousing it, because for the most part, Holocaust denial was something that was trying to give far right politics a veneer of respectability. If you were wearing a swastika armband, I mean, you weren't gonna fool anybody. So I mean, really, until the internet, it was just this tiny little community of people who were trying to get traction. They would do things like they would submit their papers to peer-reviewed journals, and they would get laughed off. Bradley Smith out in California would try to take out ads in college newspapers, and every once in a while, somebody would buy one, and then that would cause a little uptick in the attention that they would get, and then it would go away again. But really, it's Irving and it's the internet. Those are the big factors that really put it on the map in the 90s.
Right. I bring that up because, I mean, obviously a lot of these conspiracy theories and fringe movements blew up in the age of the internet, but,
Yeah.
They got bigger and the movements got stronger, but they still had some sort of life during the time in between, the time before the internet. It's interesting to me because the idea of, white supremacy, these things existed in the 70s. Like, this was not something that was barely a blip on the radar before the internet. But I do feel like Holocaust, like just flat out denying the Holocaust, is something that before the internet, I really did not even. It's something you didn't come across.
Yeah, I mean, it really is true. The internet is like the greatest thing that ever happened for these people, because the other part of it, not only is it the finding of community, but they finally have a megaphone like they've never had before. So if you get some guy that knows even a little bit about search engine optimization, puts up a website, loads it up with the right keywords and the right code, and now all of a sudden he can put his stuff in the middle of everything else. It's going to come up on a search engine search when somebody puts in, just types in Holocaust. And I haven't looked in a really long time, but I would imagine that even today, if you typed in Holocaust into Google, you're going to get on the first page of hits, you're going to get Committee for Open Debate on the Holocaust, you're going to get David Irving in there someplace. And that's an absolute win for them. That's much more publicity than they could have ever had before.
Now, you brought up before how it doesn't help the Nazis to deny they did. It was a win for them that the Holocaust happened, obviously.
Right.
But it's sort of bizarre to me. Like I can't even. I'm stuttering here because I can't even put it to words. The idea that they would sort of they're in the same like category though, basically. Like, these people clearly both are anti-Semitic, but on one end you have people who are saying nothing happened to them, and on the other end you're saying that we did something very bad to them. It's just bizarre to me that these worlds collide, I guess. I
mean, the way that we always used to sort of sum it up was to say that they could have a slogan. Their slogan would be, there was no Holocaust, but the Jews certainly deserved it. Like, that was like sort of the way their whole position could be summarized in that way.
Right.
I mean, and you make a good point here as well, which is that, we really can't forget that what lies at the core of this is just a deep-seated hatred of Jews. And to think that something like the Holocaust could be faked implies a conspiracy of just, tremendous proportion, of the likes of which, would dwarf moon landing conspiracies or, 9/11 conspiracies. Just the sheer number of people involved to be involved in something like that, right. And to coordinate their stories, and all this over 5 continents in 75 years.
Listen, a lot of crisis actors would have gotten their SAG card back in the
Absolutely.
It would have been a boon for like, it doesn't make absolutely, it's ridiculous. And speaking of crisis actors, I mean, this has to be, I guess, I'm sure there's some sort of, we could go further back. I bet there's people going 1400s, I'm sure. If we're going all the way back, there's probably some sort of people who believe some sort of crisis actor movement from the day Columbus claims he discovered America, even though there are people already here. But the Holocaust deniers have to be, I guess, the godfathers of the crisis actor belief.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, because it begins to address a certain aspect of their sort of like their techniques, like the way that they operate, right? So because the Nazis were trying to hide what they did, and because they had the opportunity to destroy a lot of evidence for what they had done, the evidence base for the Holocaust is not that great, and a significant proportion of the evidence that we do have are survivors, obviously, not to mention perpetrators, which is an incredibly important body of witnesses. But the deniers really focus more than anything else on the witnesses, on the survivors, and so they will like a basic sort of fundamental rule of history is that you rely more on what you can corroborate and less on what you can't, right?
Right.
And so you've got, if you have literally hundreds of people who were in a camp that it was, that had gas chambers in it, and these people are all saying, yeah, there were gas chambers at this camp. That's a significant amount of corroboration for this particular version of events. Now, what the deniers will do is, instead of looking at the corroboration and where all of these testimonies agree with each other in the main, they'll say, well, okay, well, this witness said that there were 8 gas chambers and this witness said that there were 6. So clearly that means that somebody made a mistake in the story that they were told to tell. And that provides proof that there's some lie being told. Or, this one says the gas chamber could hold 1,000 people. This one says it could hold 1,500. So that tells us that something's wrong. Now, anybody that knows anything about eyewitness testimony also knows that it's extraordinarily unreliable, particularly in terms of the details that are provided. And so it's important that you have a big body of it to be able to corroborate it. But, in this particular case, we do. The only reason, by the way, that we have it is because in 3 of the 6 death camps, there were revolts. And so there were enough survivors to come out of these camps to say what it was that actually happened there. Whereas for the two of the 6 camps had no revolt whatsoever. One of those camps had 2 survivors, and the other one had less than a dozen. So, I mean, what we know about those camps, we know by and large from perpetrators and from some documents that managed to survive. But I mean, if you are a Holocaust survivor, the fact that the most significant base of evidence is eyewitnesses is like a gold mine for them, because you can pick apart an eyewitness on virtually anything. I mean, defense lawyers do that for a living.
Right. If only some of the Jews at these camps had, took out their cell phones and took some video, I guess, I guess that's what they want, right? That's what no, go ahead.
At Auschwitz, what the Nazis would do was they would employ a small group of Jews to remove dead bodies from gas chambers and move them to crematory ovens. It's gruesome shit, right? I mean, obviously. And then, every few weeks they would just shoot these guys and they would get a new bunch of them, and that's how they operated. And a lot of these guys were perfectly aware of the fact that no Jews might survive at all, and they felt that it was really incredibly necessary for them to document in any way possible what was going on at that time. A lot of them wrote stuff down and then buried it underground. And even today, some of that stuff is still being found, still being, subjected to scientific analysis. Like some of the paper that it was written on is really badly decayed, and so it's been necessary to run it through an MRI and stuff like that. But at one of the crematoria in Auschwitz-Birkenau, there are 4 photographs that these guys managed to take and bury. I mean, it's like, and we know. I mean, one of the pictures is an enormous burning pit with these men pushing bodies into it to be burned, and and the only thing that Holocaust deniers can say in the face of actual photographic evidence of what it was that was going on is to claim that the photographs are faked based on their poor quality. Well, of course they're poor quality photographs. They're being taken in 1943 with a hidden camera, and then they're being buried underground for 20 years. What do you want?
Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, it's just and so, the arguments tend to be like that, basically. And the other thing is that, if there's anything that can appear even remotely exculpatory, they'll focus entirely on that, and then to the absolute exclusion of everything that is completely damning in the testimony or in the documents or anything else.
Now,
which is,
no, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's one of the reasons why so few of these people have advanced history degrees is because getting an advanced history degree, they would know not to write history that way. That you don't do that with historical evidence. It's you don't find a smoking gun, as they would call it, and say, okay, well that means that everything over here that made the case that I disagree with, now I have to completely dismiss. The basic principles of historical evidence state that you incorporate that. You don't take this and ignore that. You take this and you incorporate it with everything else. You find a narrative that makes it all fit, and if you can't, then you have more work to do, basically. But what you don't do is just say, okay, well, I found something new, and that means everything's wrong.
Right. When you were bringing up all these professors who had sort of engineering, whether engineering professor, literary professor, it is sort of interesting that you mentioned it over and over, but I just kept going in my head over as well. I guess it's sort of, especially like I think you even said with the literary professor, he sort of helped create a more professional sort of dissertation of it all. I do wonder if that's sort of someone with that background was able to sort of, would a historian, would a professor of history, even if they were a Holocaust denier, which they wouldn't be doing a very good at their job, would they be able to craft it in a way that would have taken off like this literary guy did?
Well, I mean, to his credit, I think David Irving managed to do that to some extent for a little while. But when he just began to push ideas that were too controversial, the pushback actually that he got was from within the historical community. So he's trying to a certain extent capitalize on trends in German historiography in the 60s and 70s, right? So there's because you remember, like I mentioned it before, his book Hitler's War in 1977, he's talking about like trying to exculpate Hitler from the process, right? To remove Hitler from the process, and that way he can preserve Hitler but still acknowledge the Nazis were bad and did terrible things, right?
Right.
In doing that, he is trying to exploit a bunch of researchers, mainly from Germany, but there are a couple in the United States during the 60s and 70s, who are espousing a sort of school of historiography called functionalism, which basically says there wasn't like a master plan before the war started to do this. It sort of unfolded in bits and pieces over the course of events with the war. If the war had gone differently, then perhaps things would have gone differently. And furthermore, that in fact a lot of decision making was probably out of Hitler's hands. Now, they support that particular point of view, based on historical evidence. What Irving tried to do was to sort of like capitalize on that trend to remove Hitler from the equation entirely. And when he did that, the pushback from these historians in Germany was just enormous. They just said, "What the hell are you doing?" Like, we acknowledge as believers in this functionalist idea that there was a lot of important action that was undertaken by people much further down the chain of command. But I mean, without Hitler at the top, none of this happens. To try to remove him from it is just ludicrous. Right. And in that way, he actually just sort of began to alienate some of the people that had been defending him for a very long time. Because, as strange as it may sound, particularly, more than 40 years after the fact, Irving had done really important archival research and had brought forward documents that he had published for the first time. Like I said before, he was a big deal. He had his books, regularly reviewed in the best journals and stuff like that. And, just sort of like as a more popular culture reference. I mean, when Kurt Vonnegut wrote Slaughterhouse-Five, in his introduction, he relies heavily on Irving's work about Dresden. It turns out that most of that work is wrong. I mean, but that book is also, more than 50 years old. I mean, it was what we knew at the time on the basis of research that Irving had gone to Germany to do. He was a real historian at one point, but he began to just sort of push these fringe theories to such an extent that the only people that would accept him after a certain point was this fringe in the United States and to a lesser extent in Europe, who was very closely tied to the far right.
Right. Now, I'm looking at your site, Holocaust Controversies, and a name that I would say probably makes up 75% of your most recent pieces on there. The name that
Carlos Mattone.
Yep, the name that keeps popping up is this Carlos Mattone.
Carlo Mattone.
Can you? Who is this guy? Go ahead.
so Carlo Mattone has been knocking around for a long time. He's Italian. I believe he's from northern Italy, I think, like Turin or Milan. I can't remember exactly where. He is by far the most productive, prolific of these guys, and in a lot of ways, he is the last man standing. Mattone, his output, first of all, is just enormous, and for years he has worked, I should say, with a guy named Jürgen Graf. Jürgen Graf is a Swiss Holocaust denier. He lives in Russia now, and he's a neo-Nazi. Like, Mattone has actually done a really good job over the course of his career as a Holocaust denier of keeping his hands out of politics. And so he has managed to some extent, sort of be above the fray. So, and for that reason, he sort of got attention that most Holocaust deniers don't get as a result of both, and he actually does archival research too, importantly. Although he doesn't bring forth any documents that are new, as far as I know, he actually does go to archives and stuff like that. He does like the equivalent of real research. He's also fairly well educated. He has advanced degrees. Again, I think he might have a law degree. He definitely has a philosophy degree, but again, not a history degree. And so, because of his relatively clean hands with regard to the politics aspect of it, because of his the volume of the stuff that he puts out, and because it has the appearance of being very scholarly at first glance, he has done very well in this particular field. And so I blog with 6 or 7 other people at Holocaust Controversies, and they actually have paid significantly more attention to him than I have. I've written a handful of pieces on him, mainly just based on a new book that he wrote. But they actually took a significant portion of his work and just submitted it to painstaking historical inquiry. And if this was about 5 years, I guess it's actually more like 6 or 7 years now, they published a 500-page white paper that basically refuting Mattone's entire case. And there's been some back and forth since then. And Mattone has lost one of his co-authors, and he's also he's getting on in years, but he's sort of still going. And so from my standpoint, I've done a lot of research on the Holocaust in Latvia. So I took the 20 pages or so that he dedicated in his last book to covering that topic, and just took what I already knew and saw how well or poorly he had portrayed this information in these 20 pages. Because I was actually sort of on a hiatus from the blog at the time that they were doing this work, and so I wasn't involved in it at all. I hadn't actually read anything by Mattone. So I read Mattone for the first time, read 20 pages, and saw how many mistakes I could find, and there were just a boatload. I mean, just an enormous number of things that he did tremendously wrong. And it was both from the standpoint of just his methodology being for shit, which was, I kind of expected, but also just there's a lag for their familiarity with historical research. Like, probably doesn't come to any surprise to you or to anybody that's watching this that there's an enormous amount of historical research that gets done on the Holocaust. And your average Holocaust denier, when almost always he, is writing something trying to refute some aspect of the Holocaust, that person's usually 20 years behind on the literature. So they're busy refuting some position that some historian took back in the 1980s or 90s that has already been either confirmed a dozen times, or is no longer really believed because some other particular set of evidence or arguments has come along that they're just not familiar with. And Mattone just struck me as being in every way a complete sham. I mean, for all of his productivity, there was just nothing in there that could get by, like a freshman history professor. Just that the arguments were bad. The treatment of the evidence was amateurish. I mean, if not just plainly dishonest. And what it showed me was just that he's not any better than any of the rest of them. Some of them can give a kind of veneer of being scholarly, but in the end, they don't really know what they're doing. And that's obviously that's a benefit. I mean, the person that actually sort of organized the blog in the first place is a guy named Nick Terry, and he's a lecturer he's actually a senior lecturer now in history at the University of Exeter in the UK. He put together the blog when he was a grad student, and so he's been working on this stuff for a very, very long time. And so he sort of led the effort to refute Mattone's work using, sort of the best principles possible, as well as the most cutting edge research and all of that stuff. And so, somebody like Nick, who is a full-time historian and really knows what he's doing, could really take a guy like Mattone to task and really sort of, show him for what he is. Almost no historians, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, actually, really pay much attention to this, even though, as we've both already noted, for the last 20 years, it's just been much more out there than ever before. There's some attention paid to it, in political science and sociology and ethics and law. But from the standpoint of history, it's largely ignored because the idea basically there is that if you were to actually pay it any attention, you'd be giving it more attention than it's worth.
Right. And another interesting point you brought up, obviously, is that the ladies have to step it up in the Holocaust denialism world. What's going on? I mean, you can't let the guys take all the credit. No, but
well,
but it is.
You do the far right conspiracy circuit, right?
Right.
I mean, so what's the gender breakdown as you?
It's easy. It's like literally 99% male, and the 1% of women actually end up being like sort of like the traditionalists.
Yeah.
Who, but when it comes to then it usually gets to a point where the guy also obviously believes that same stuff, but obviously if you're a trad wife, you're out there with a Twitter account talking about this stuff, because if we know about you, you're out there speaking.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, what happens with like 90% of that 1% of women, they end up posting about how like they're being abused because their husband doesn't want them online or some shit. Like they don't connect the sexism, the anti-feminist beliefs that both her and her husband share to eventually fucking with their own shit. It's a interesting dynamic to say the least. But
it's not a very empowering environment for women, the far right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, how could you be a major figure on the far right and be a woman when the misogyny is so necessary to those beliefs for the most part? I mean, obviously,
Marine Le Pen is really the only one that I can think of off the top of my head.
Right. I'm also if you wanted to think like mainstream figures who are in politics, for sure. You're probably right. I can't think of any other off the top of my head, but for every Lauren Southern, I could name like 50 dudes. Like it's not even close.
Yeah.
And
your Molyneux to Southern ratio is very, very large.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's another stunning thing to me, though, is actually, let me ask you this first of all, because we actually talked a lot about the history, which is great because that's how we need to start with this stuff. But let's focus a little bit more on, I guess, the current movement. Now, who is like, I would say, because what I'm noticing is a lot of these guys skew older, which again, we're talking, it's not weird to see because it makes sense in a way for this specific movement. But who is the one of the younger big names? Like what is the youngest of these big names in this world?
Yeah. Well, so the biggest name for a while was this guy named Eric Hunt. And Eric Hunt, he actually got himself famous about, it's probably 15 years ago now. He accosted Elie Wiesel in an elevator in San Francisco, and he got sentenced to prison for 2 years. And he had been, because he was convinced that the tattoo on Wiesel's arm was fake and wanted to confront him in person and get him to admit that he was lying about having been in Auschwitz.
Right.
And so Eric was... And he's a pretty disturbed kid. Like, I call him a kid. He's probably well into his 30s at this point. The funny thing about Eric Hunt is that, so he gets out of prison and he goes right back on the hobby horse with the Holocaust denial and all that. And he decides that he's going to be the guy that really carries the ball across the goal line. Like, he's going to be the guy that finally makes Holocaust denial a mainstream belief. And he sort of dedicates himself to doing some real research. And it occurs to him over the course of doing this research that he's wrong. that he can no longer really deny that the Holocaust actually happened, that the weight of the evidence that he's found is actually too great. So he renounces Holocaust denial. Now, he remains on the far right. He still hates Jews, but he can no longer accept the idea that the Holocaust didn't happen because he claims that it would be dishonest to do that. So he was like the young shining star of the Holocaust denial movement. And he's finished. I mean, he's left. He's just plain gone.
That's the weird thing about that to me. But and please remember where you were leaving off. But the weird thing about that to me is, when it comes to your general white supremacy, white nationalism, neo-Nazis, the KKK. I understand how young people fall into it because these are, they end up socializing with these types of people. It becomes their entire worldview because they're hanging out with these people in real life. They're basically going to these websites, these forums, these chats, and it just envelops them. And, these white supremacist beliefs hinge on what is perceived to them to be things that affect them in the real world, whether, they don't have a girlfriend, they live in their parents' basement, maybe they do have a home, or maybe they do have a girlfriend. Doesn't necessarily mean these are all unsuccessful people, but there's something, let's put it this way, probably one of those beliefs for those types of people is they would have a better job and make more money if it wasn't for someone in the other groups stopping them from doing so, taking that job that's rightfully theirs. But it all hinges on things that affects their everyday life. And that's sort of, I get how people who are young could fall into that world. And there are, it's important to get those people out because there are people who are stuck in this who aren't true believers. But how do you fall into Holocaust denialism or whatever? How do you become a Holocaust denier in that way? Because you're not living that stuff. You literally just never logged on and Google searched Holocaust. Like, it's impossible. like it's not like it's like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't know whether to laugh or cry about that. Like, it's literally something where you can check out and see, this is what happened. Like, you can't go on you can't go online and be like, and search, and these guys can't find definitive proof that an immigrant didn't take their job. I mean, there's studies, I'm sure, but they can't find the proof that specific job wasn't taken by whatever guy has that specific job. I get that. It's still ridiculous, but in their mind, it makes sense. This to me, you can. Like, it's not like it's not like they're living in it. Like, it's you look it up and you find out via photographic evidence, via first person. I mean, you can talk to people who who lived through the Holocaust. Like, it's stunning to me that's the story of this guy.
So part of it is part of it is the conspiracy theory mindset, and again, it's not just the internet, but like 9/11 was a real boon for Holocaust denial, because once you began to get the narrative, in particular this narrative that 4,000 Jews were told not to go to work on 9/11. That very easily bleeds over into it was actually the Mossad that brought down the Twin Towers, right? And once you swallowed that, right? Because obviously it's easy to find an uninformed person, tell them a few things that seem plausible, like, oh, those towers fell into their own footprint at near free fall speed. That they're going to begin to believe in things like controlled demolition, and give them bits of information, dancing Israelis and blah, 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 right? Now they believe that Israel did 9/11. Now you've got the thin edge of the wedge in. and you can begin to tell them that that the Jews have done, X, Y, and Z as well, right? And so the beautiful thing about conspiracy theories is that they're a closed system, right? I mean, any new bit of information that you get just fits into the conspiracy. So you can be shown disproof or something that you believe as part of a conspiracy theory, but your way of assimilating that information is not going to be to change your mind. Your way of assimilating that information is going to be, well, of course they say that, they're part of the conspiracy.
Right.
So
right.
I trust Wikipedia. Wikipedia is being manipulated by rooms full of Israeli soldiers whose sole job that it is to edit Wikipedia pages. I can't trust any book published by a university press because all of the people that work at the university are left-wing Jews. So of course that once you have somebody's mind sort of primed to apply that kind of confirmation bias to everything, then there's virtually nothing that they won't believe. That's why there's such a huge crossover between now these people that are espousing flat Earth.
Right.
And no moon landing.
But see,
right?
I totally get that in the sense that, they're in the bubble. And once they're in, it's impossible almost to get out. But in that specific instance with that one guy, to me, it just seemed like so easy for him to just not believe it anymore. like as crazy as it's going to sound, if you are a Holocaust denier and you've been so and you're never going to change your mind, I understand the world you're in because it makes, like you just said, it makes sense to them because that's all they know. But for someone to just be able to take that peek out and just drop it that quickly is just astounding.
Oh, he didn't drop it quickly, though. I mean, he'd been out there for 15 years. I mean, you got to, and on top of it, I mean, to not, and this is not a joke. I mean, the kid's got a fairly serious mental illness. I mean, so
right. Well, I think they all at some level, right? I mean,
but this kid really did have a diagnosed mental illness, and I think to the extent that maybe it got under management, he might have got a bit of clarity, and that might have helped. I don't know that for sure. I'm just guessing, but I do know that he was diagnosed as mentally ill. I mean, so. There's and yeah, of course, there's a fair number of them that have some series of issues. If nothing else, then like personality disorder. But I think this kid actually had some genuine delusions that were maybe really tainting his way of thinking.
Right. Now, sorry, froze for a moment. Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I just want to, I definitely want to have you on again to go further into this because we didn't even, to me, I don't even think we got even close to getting into sort of how this has sort of seeped into the current right.
No, I didn't even get to Chuck Johnson and Vox Day and Styx Hexenhammer and all these guys.
Right. And I think now that we've really dived into this history, I think that's why we should leave it there with that, because I think that's literally a whole nother hour, especially when you start talking about the guys I'm familiar with as well.
Yeah.
So before we go though, I just want to ask you, what is sort of, I guess, how do I put this? What would you say is the sort of where, not even to bring up those guys that we just mentioned who we'll talk about next time, but where do you think Holocaust deniers are going in the sense of, I don't know how to explain this, the more traditional deniers in terms of people who believe it didn't happen and they write this sort of fantasized history explaining how it didn't happen, sort of, I guess, not to push their own white supremacist like Chuck Johnson and those guys do, but just for the classic anti-Semites. Where do you think those guys are going?
Well, unfortunately, I think we're seeing, there's obviously a resurgence. I mean, I think that, that Trump has emboldened a significant proportion of these people that probably would have, kept their heads below water if they didn't feel like they were going to be able to to do some of the things that they've been doing lately. I mean, we started this discussion. You mentioned the synagogue shootings over the last 6 months. I mean, that was like a regular thing in France, in the years leading up to this past year here. And that's an unfortunate fact of life, to be a minority in countries that are in which the pendulum is swinging right. And unfortunately, it's anti-Semitism. It's as old as Europe is, basically of Europe, and so it'll wax and wane. I think right now it's at a point where it's waxing. I am not fully discouraged against it waning at some point in the future. One thing that I sort of have been kind of clinging to over the course of the last couple of years is that, like, as far as white supremacy in the United States is concerned, this is really their last hurrah. I mean, the horses really left the barn in terms of this being a white country, right? I mean, demographics are demographics. And yeah, like, they're having their heyday right now. But the sheer fact of the matter is that it's not going to be a white country anymore, and they're going to lose. And so they can kick and scream as much as they want, but in the end, they're going to lose. And I think, it's common sense to recognize that. With anti-Semitism, it's more complicated, unfortunately. It's not simply a matter of demographics, because Jews are always going to be a tiny minority. And that being the case, it's unfortunately, I think it's really a matter of some amount of eternal vigilance. And that's, I said this the other day in the aftermath to somebody the other day in the aftermath of the shooting in California. I said, this was supposed to be the place where this didn't happen. This was supposed to be the country that we could live in, where this kind of thing didn't happen on a regular basis. So it's, it's disheartening, but, I'm hoping it's temporary, but I'm going to keep my eyes open. I'm going to, be in a state of heightened preparedness.
Right. Now, I know I just said I was going to let you go, but one more follow-up to that. So you said that this was, you think this is the last hurrah of these guys. Now, you don't think that, with everything you said being true, I mean, obviously their numbers are dwindling, but you don't think that what we're seeing is probably going to be an uptick, because as they see that, they'll be able to more outwardly point to, hey, look what's happening, and blame these blame basically these scapegoats. Yeah. That they'll be able to bring more of these folks on their side. And again, I think we're going more into the guys I want to talk about next time. And this is obviously they're in many ways they're all one and the same. But for my purposes, in looking at all these fringe groups to the very minutia of what they believe, I do think there's some sort of difference. There's a way to separate them a bit, because I don't think, like you mentioned, there's the ones who are proud the Holocaust happened, and then there's the ones who pretend it didn't. And while they both have a deep-seated hatred of Jews, they're both sort of fighting the same battle and at the same time fighting a different war, I guess you can explain. So, sure. So so could you speak to that? Do you think, I do think the white supremacists, like these current day, really the Trumpian types are going to gain in numbers. But for these Holocaust deniers, like these more the types that we've been talking about, who've been around for many, many decades. Yeah. Do you think they're going to be the ones who sort of lose their? Because I do think that the Holocaust denial stuff is going to end up. You think you're right there. I think the future of the white supremacist movement will not be able to deny the Holocaust. They'll be able to herald it as a great success story in their history. Yeah. So well, do you think that? I mean, go ahead.
I think, I think that, look, I think first of all, a couple of things. First of all, the white nationalist movement in the United States made an enormous mistake by hitching their wagon to Trump. I mean, when they tried this in the 1930s, they chose Lindbergh. And now they chose Trump, and because it's because he's so corrupt and so visibly corrupt and so unpopular, with a significant proportion of people in this country. It's going to be a discredit to their movement that they tied themselves to him in the first place. So I think that that's going to do a lot of damage to them, A. B, I think obviously there's going to be a significant proportion of people who are going to be, who are going to espouse white supremacy in some way, right? That doesn't mean they're going to be in the Klan, but they're going to want their positions as white people in this country to remain uppermost, right?
Right.
But I think that there's an enormous number of people in this country who are uncomfortable about where their position is in the fluidity of our demographics, right? And to prevent those people from drifting toward these much smaller groups who are much more radical and much more dangerous, there has to be economic justice for them because they're suffering like everybody else is. And this is sort of like, I think back to, to Howard Zinn. I mean, this is the great division of working people in the United States on the basis of race. Rather than hating your boss, hate the guy that's a different race from you who's competing against you for your job. Rather than you guys joining the same union and making sure you both get the same pay. And I think that it's great that Sanders is out there communicating that message finally and going to these communities and showing these people by just sitting down with them for a half an hour and explaining to them in the detail that they need to understand it, what economic justice actually looks like and how they have actually voted against their own self-interest.
Right.
When people, people might not ever love the people that aren't like them. But that we don't need them to love each other. We need them to accept that we live in the same country and we're all on the same side. Economic justice could go a long way toward accomplishing that. I really do believe that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I do think it's really underrated that we're going a little bit off with the bringing up Bernie Sanders, but yeah. I really do think it's underappreciated and undercovered and underrated at how powerful it is in this moment in time, especially that one of the presidential frontrunners, the person who's invigorated the left, yeah, and is the ideological leader of literally the next generation of the Democratic Party, people under the age of 50, especially millennials and Generation Z, is a Jewish man who has family who died in the Holocaust.
Right.
And it's quite frankly disgusting to me when, in this moment in time, he just gets thrown aside by certain Bernie haters as just another old white guy. That's a whole nother discussion about Jewish people and whiteness, but it's just to not in the age of Donald Trump and the rise of white supremacy, I don't see how you do not bring that very specific and very important background fact about him up. But that's for another day. And you will be, I hope everyone enjoyed this interview. I hope everyone enjoyed this interview because Dr. Andrew Mathis, you will without a doubt be on the show again because we still got to talk about the current day factions of this movement, especially my favorite floor pooper, Chuck C. Johnson.
Yes.
You
might hear my dog barking. I'm gonna need to go take him out.
Okay. Well, we don't want another. We don't want you to have a floor pooper in your house.
Floor pooping. Exactly.
So
Matt, thanks a lot.
Take care, Doctor. I guess should I call you Doctor?
Andrew.
Thanks,
we'll
Andrew.
Talk soon.
Take care. Have a good night.
You too.
All right. Let me just bloop bloop. I love that Skype sound. I should get it. I don't even know if you guys hear it. I don't think you do. So let's go to the members half of the show. And first off, let's thank the patrons who make this show possible. Patreon.com/MattBinder. If you can afford to become a patron, please do so. I ask for $5 a month. You can give more. You can give less. it will help me grow this show. Right now, I'm doing an episode a week. Usually it goes about an hour to 2, sometimes 2.5 hours. I'm trying to cut down those longer ones so I can give extra instead of just those really long episodes. But right now, that's what it is. And the interview portion is free for everybody. But if I don't have patrons, even the free portion wouldn't happen. Because I do need a little bit of funding to help keep the show going, pay for hosting of the podcast, all that fun stuff. Equipment when necessary. But as a bonus, the patrons get the audio of the second half, which is me sometimes talking about what happened in the day, sometimes shooting the shit, reading your questions, your comments from the YouTube live stream chat. I recently started using Restream, which allows me to simultaneously stream to YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Periscope, aka Twitter's live stream platform. I don't really have a Twitch audience, but I noticed that there was a Periscope audience out there I did not know I had previously to using this software. So, welcome, guys. You can go to youtube.com/MattBinder and subscribe there so you can get notifications when I go live. Also, I'm going to be doing produced short standalone videos that are not part of the podcast to upload to the YouTube channel. I'm going to do them regardless, but it would be very helpful. And I'd be able to put out way more if we're able to go to the Patreon members. So, without any further ado, these are the people who help fund the show and make it all possible. Abigail T., Adam Q., Alan B., Andrew H., Benji A., Bobby M., Champagne Communist G., Christine H., Colin R., Dave K., David Z., Dragon Slayer, Dum Dum Dum, Floaties, Fraz K., Francis Zek, FTW, All Day, Greg D., Ian J., Jameson Test, Janelle A., Jasmine H., Jeff K., Jonathan B., Jordan V., Joseph R., Josh C., Katie S., Kyle, Max W., User Me, Michael J., Michael M., Mr. Danks, Nicole A., Namde Net, Omid M., Romina O., Sina, the wonderful people over at Struggle Session, TM, Tamni G, Thaddeus A, Tina M, Tom G, Tom M, Trine E, Will P, and Zarin. You can also support this show by, like I mentioned earlier, subscribing to YouTube, youtube.com/MattBinder, or doomed.tv. Both will take you there. Doomedpod.com if you just want to listen to the podcast. You can subscribe to iTunes from there as well. Subscribe via Google Play. If you have a moment, please leave a review on iTunes. Click the stars. Write a little text review. It really helps the show get noticed via podcast platforms. I'm going to look into getting this show on Spotify. I really should have filled out the forms there already, but I dropped the ball on that. But what could you do? You guys know I'm terrible at self-promotion. But I'm working on it. See you guys all on the members half coming up right now. If you're watching live, don't change that channel. For you audio listeners, you podcasters, see you all next time on Doomed. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the members portion of the show. Now, for people who just happen to have been online Saturday/Sunday, last Saturday/Sunday at like 2 a.m., I was testing Restream, and we started talking about the people who jumped into the chat with me at 2 a.m. Eastern time. We started chit-chatting about Game of Thrones, episodes 1 and 2 of season 8. And that was a lot of fun. And I had hoped to do that after Sunday's show, but something came up. I was not able to watch Sunday's show till episode 3, the big battle, until yesterday. So what I'm thinking is that maybe Saturday night, not 2 a.m., but Saturday night at some point, maybe like 11, 12 midnight Eastern time, I'll jump on again and we'll talk about the last episode, because that was a lot of fun. And a lot of people wanted to talk to me about Game of Thrones, because everyone's watching Game of Thrones right now. Now, I didn't upload it to the members' audio feed. I don't know if you guys are into that. I didn't want to spoil anything for people who aren't watching Game of Thrones. But maybe for now, unless I hear from patrons that they want the audio version, that will only be YouTube live stream stuff. And I'll do some of those every now and then. We'll have fun with it, right? I don't know why I said right, because you guys aren't saying right to me, right? Maybe you are in the chat, actually. Let me go take a look. Absolutely, Matt. We will have fun with it. I'm lying. No one said that. I'm going in like super speed talking right now. I just realized. I'm going to slow it down. I'm actually very tired. You could probably tell by my blinking throughout the episode. But Andrew was great. And it was fascinating. I honestly, you guys know, I know a lot about all sorts of corners of the web, the modern far-right fringe movements, the modern conspiracy theorists. I even know a little, history stemming from that stuff. But Holocaust denial is honestly an area I just wasn't all that well versed in until speaking with Andrew. And it's I think it's really important to listen to stuff, to listen to that particularly. Like I mentioned, I think if we're talking broadly, you could throw these guys in the same group as, the anti-Semites who are white supremacists on the right, far right, the alt-right. But if we're going to really jump into talking about these movements at the level we do on this show, there's an importance to separating them when talking about what they believe. Because I think there is something to the people who look at the Holocaust and think it was great. It's scary. And there is something also scary and important to look into about people who said it never even happened. And I think there's a fundamental difference there in how they're thinking, even if it comes from the same place. All right, let's go to the chat. Kennedy was very excited for this episode. Thank you, Kennedy. And Grimlock said, let the banning commence. And Kennedy replied, Matt prefers that I ease up on the ban hammer. Right. My dad jumped in early on and said, good evening to the Legion of Doomers. Thank you, Kennedy, for respecting my enjoying the easing up on the ban hammer. Zarin says, this podcast definitely has the dopest name for its listeners. Thank you. Theo pointed out I had a hot mic. And Zarin said, oh my God, how can you say that, Matt? I don't remember what I said, but I can assure you it was nothing bad. Because I had noticed my mic was on, and I didn't even care. I believe actually what I said before the show started, when I was setting everything up. Andrew's mic was not on yet. My guest mic was not on yet. And I believe he said to me, oh, I see Kennedy is the mod or something like that. He was mentioning he noticed a bunch of Majority Report regulars in the chat. And I said, yep, all those guys, all those good people are mods and listeners. So what's so bad about that? Ayuashka, oh shit, hot Mike Matt. Hot Mike Matt, I like that. Yeah, that's me, hot Mike Matt, right? Let's go to Prince of the Sun asks, wait, Watson is banned? Right, he got banned from Facebook and I believe Instagram as well. There was Facebook basically decided today to ban people that they deemed dangerous. And that included Alex Jones, who, while some of you might have known he was already suspended, apparently he was not outright banned yet, even though his page, his InfoWars channel and everything was banned from, was suspended from Facebook. He still had an Instagram account that he regularly posted on. So him, Paul Joseph Watson, Milo Yiannopoulos, who also had a huge Facebook page and a Instagram account, Laura Loomer, Paul Nealon, who else? Trying to think off the top of my head. Probably another name or two that I can't think of right now. Maybe I'll do a video on that. I'll throw together a video on that. Sounds good? But yeah, they're gone from Facebook and Instagram. Ayahuasca calls Candace Owens a great gateway drug, right? Siren singer of neo-Nazism, says Grimlock. Chips Hadson, talking about the Shoah, was considered pro-Soviet propaganda in the USA for some time. Gutter and Stars over in the Periscope chat. Howdy. Are you still doing a show with Sam? You are a great team. I haven't been on the Majority Report in many years. Thank you though for the kind words. I'm not still doing a show with Sam, but I should reach out to Sam and get him on this show, and I should reach out to Sam and force him to put me on the Majority, have me a guest on the Majority Report. Chuck E. Cheese. In the current era of the internet, some people make really good money saying insane stuff. So now there's a profit motive for some of the people who get into this stuff. Absolutely. Absolutely. Kevo in the Periscope chat says, oh my God, it's Jon Snow. First of all, thank you. Kit Harington is a very handsome man, I think. So, and you could either be calling me Jon Snow or my guest. And while Andrew was also a good-looking guy, he did not in any way, shape, or form resemble Jon Snow. So I assume you're talking about me. And so thank you. I appreciate the kind words. Unless you're going to follow it up with, you know nothing. To that I reply, screw you. Daniel, it's vile eliminationist revisionism, talking about the Holocaust deniers. Massive cognitive dissonance. Absolutely. Absolutely. Granger in the Periscope chat. Can't wait to see you on TMBS, Matt. I actually was on Michael's show last March, over a year ago. And he has not invited me back on since? What? It's been that long ago? All right, this is what you all got to do. Ready? I know a lot of you listen to Michael's show. Don't know why. No, I'm joking. But you all need to mass... You know what everyone's doing to Dave Rubin, where Debate Sam... They're all replying to him, Debate Sam Cedar? Every time Michael Brooks tweets, you should all reply, when's Matt Binder... When you're going to have Matt Binder on as guest? Where's Matt? When's Matt Binder going to be on as guest? At me, too. You should all do that. I'm sure Michael would love it. I'm sure it'd make him very happy. Bullwhip says, my biggest takeaway is that deniers are too stupid even for Nazis. Daniel brought this up when I was talking about people who were in this white supremacist bubble. Called it validation gangs. That's yeah. Dank Uger says, it's crazy how little I knew about all this. I guess probably a good thing. Too, LOL. Right. This is a movement that I think is on its way out. But it has spearheaded the same sort of beliefs and anti-Semitism. Basically, it's helped push and propel a movement that's not completely born out of it, but has been benefited greatly by it. They don't deny the Holocaust, but they're on board with everything else. So, yeah, it's certainly an interesting... I sort of put this episode up there with the LaRouche episode I did, in terms of looking into conspiracy theorists and these movements that aren't as popular today. They might have had some ebbs and flows where they've had their moments recently, but they're not currently on the uptick today. But they're still the backbone of so much that we are seeing today. So yeah, it certainly is an interesting dynamic there. And it's not at all shocking that people listening to this wouldn't know too much about the Holocaust deniers. Choke It on Ashes says to Dank, me too. I've been watching a channel called Faraday Speaks, who was an alt-writer but has woken up. It's interesting. I think I've actually come across that name before, but I've not seen the channel. I'm going to throw that in my notes here. So I can look into reaching out to that channel. That'll be interesting. Let's go back to the YouTube comments. Kennedy says, I like Faraday Speaks. He uploaded an interview with the Surfs earlier that I got to check out. Fearless Samurai on Periscope says, Matt, with that beard, you were definitely worthy of the Thor's weapon, buddy. Thank you. Wow. Now I look like Chris Hemsworth? Everyone's being so... Jon Snow, Chris Hemsworth. Oof. I don't know if I'm going to cut my hair now. I might break the promise that's been going on for over a month. I'm going to get a haircut. If you're all giving me such... Maybe I need to start, showing up to this live stream with a fan blowing wind in my hair. Daniel S. Like radio/TV miles, Colonnes, aka Rwanda Elimination Rate. I don't know what you're talking about there. Rwanda Eliminationist Radio. Bullwhip brings up climate change deniers. Choking on Ashes says, love the Surfs. It's interesting to hear how people fall down the rabbit hole. I'm 52, so I don't know anyone who believes this. I gotta reach out. I've come across the Surf stuff. I'm going to... You guys are giving me some good ideas here now that you're just name dropping some... fellow YouTubers. Oh, whoops. Okay. Elcid. People get trapped down the same conspiracy paranoia holes with aliens, demons, chemtrails, etc. And often the different threads of crazy mix. Right, absolutely. And I do think there are more harmless factions there. The classic conspiracy theorists to me are sort of like the alien folks, the demons, the 666 sort of, not really Satanists, but yeah, I think they're definitely different levels. And can they push someone further? Absolutely. But, if you're just someone who's really into, unsolved mysteries and stuff like that, then it's possible to to have those beliefs and not fall deeper into some of this stuff. But there definitely is some overlap, and I think we should get into that on this show, actually. I'll reach out to some people. Elcid says, not anywhere near the same. The paranormal fixations, I think, are mostly harmful to the believers themselves, whereas the racists seek to harm others. And that's really another great point. And that's sort of what I'm getting at, but I did not put it so eloquently. Yeah, I mean, cults aside, when we're talking about the more classic forms of this stuff, you know, like cults where people literally drink the Kool-Aid to jump on board a passing asteroid. Yeah, that really, and even that, I guess they're really only doing harm to themselves. But, well, not really, because they bring people on board who might not have done it right. Snuffleupagus, good enough. Snuffleupagus on Periscope. Why keep talking about the Jews and the Holocaust? Well, that was the episode. Elsid, but it's the same type of thinking which moves beyond evidence and down circular spirals that they can't get out of until some sort of shock of it. Kennedy says, surprisingly, the chat has been pretty chill tonight. Well, I was expecting at least a couple Nazis. Grimlock says, don't jinx it, right? Brian says, yeah, Banhammer had the night off. Fearless Samurai says, don't assume that, speaking of white supremacy on the way, having their last hurrah, because they supposedly, they were supposed to lose already for years now. Right, and I sort of brought up my point when he said that, where I don't think it's their last hurrah, unless he was specifically talking about Holocaust deniers. I think that's true. They're losing their prominence. The anti-binge says, the power of the 2020 census and attendant data in the Trump administration's clutch right now, right? That's a good point. G Snuffleupagus 1 in the Periscope chat says, who hates the Jews? Well, that's probably why the Ben Hammer had the night off in the YouTube chat. Seems like we have some problems in the Periscope chat. The anti-binge continues with his comment before about the census. When that racial/citizenship data gets into denier hands, the false info will spread like fire, right? Fearless Samurai says, hubris on the left is what helped in part get us here by just telling on facts and the like, right? Choking on Ashes says, I don't understand why white people give a shit that we might disappear. I mean, I would say most white people don't care. To an extent, maybe. I really think most white people don't care. At least the white people I know. Anti-binge in the Periscope chat says, Hoover was the vehicle for anti-gov sentiment and Trump is the parallel. Dreezy says, Molyneux is so dumb. I said, Viva Chile, and he asked for a bowl. Well, I think he was being racist there. Fearless Samurai says, yeah, you have unmuddied the waters, which is difficult but necessary, right? Talking about I think he was talking about here, or she. I think Fearless was bringing up the fact that you have to sort of separate these groups at some level. Dank, about my guest, says, I would take a class from this guy. Yeah, Andrew was fantastic. His website, by the way, I mentioned it earlier, but just didn't even another name drop. HolocaustControversies.blogspot.com. Dreezy says, if only Chomsky had Googled that guy before writing an introduction. Right, well, everyone fucks up sometimes, right? Kennedy says, yes, I love this interview. Dank says, I learned a lot. Ayahuasca says, this episode has been lit as fuck. Or lit as fire. Who knows? Because Ayahuasca basically put lit AF. Kennedy Crouch says, love you, Thames. Right. That's good old... Right. Thames from the chats and Twitter. Choking on Ashes says, the GOP and the Tories need to go extinct, with Blairites and the corporate Dems going on the right where they belong. I agree. Kennedy, I've been outlining a paper that I have to write about what D-Day means in 2019, and this interview actually inspired me a lot. That is great to hear, Kennedy. Love to hear that this is helping with your education. I am truly probably one of the nicest things anyone can say about this show. Misha says, love. Dank says, I'm no longer a patron, sadly. I had something come up with my car this weekend, but I'll be back soon, LOL. Dank, no problem at all. Take care of what you need to, buddy. And come back when you can. Choking on Ashes says, I have to watch the beginning. All right, because you came in late, right? Hardcore Heel says, I didn't know you were a hobo. Well, thank you. After someone calling me Jon Snow and Thor, someone had to bring me back to reality, right? Kennedy says, oh shit, I just started using Twitch. I'll have to pop in there occasionally. Yeah, I just have the Twitch set up. I have zero audience there. I'd be shocked if anyone was watching over there, but it's there for people who do want to watch. Misha, congrats to your brother, who is apparently, you're apparently getting ready for your brother's wedding. Well, congrats to your brother. Dank says, I have a Twitch, but YouTube is just the easiest. Well, I'm not a partner on Twitch, so YouTube, but I am a YouTube partner, and YouTube pays me to show ads on these videos and gives me the opportunity to have the super chats. So I prefer you watching on YouTube anyway. Dreezy, Matt Daddy, Candace Owens retired from Turning Point USA after people demanded she be fired. Right. I think I mentioned that she wasn't there anymore. Choking on Ashes says, I need to watch Game of Thrones. I really love the show. Dang says, I made a correct prediction, but no spoilers. Grim says, I don't have HBO right now. Now, hello, Renee. You've been missing from this chat. Ayahuasca says, I caught the restream of the Game of Thrones one last weekend at 2 a.m. An hour later you caught it, even though you were up for... Well, maybe I should do these late night streams when I can, because you guys are apparently insomniacs and never go to sleep. Dank says, I didn't realize how deep this goes. I just wrote them all off as racist flat earthers for the most part. Kennedy says, can't wait to see Logan Paul promoting Holocaust denial, ironically. Oof. Actually, I don't want to give him credit, but if you watch the Logan Paul flat earther movie, it was all just bullshit. In fact, it was probably a sort of a good pie in the face for a lot of those guys. He doesn't make them look good. But I don't think he, at the same time, has the ability to say what should have been said. But he doesn't really promote it in the way I think people were worried he would have. Choking on Ashes says, I only see those people online. We have a problem in the UK and deprived, mostly in the north of the UK. Elsid says, are the Bolton forces pushing for a coup in Venezuela going to keep going forever, expecting that eventually it will work? Or does some number of failures start to matter? I'm going to have someone on to talk about Venezuela. I am in no way, shape, or form an expert in that area, to be quite honest with you. So I'll have someone on to talk about that. And sort of, I guess, the conspiracies and different factions surrounding that. For sure. Dreezy says, Farrakhan only got banned from Facebook because all the white nationalists are always bringing him up in like, hey, what about Farrakhan? Why can't he do it? Why? Right, well, no real loss there either, though. I did enjoy the fact that they were all so obsessed while all their ideological equals got banned. The right wing, on Twitter at least, was obsessed with Farrakhan being classified as far right by the Washington Post and other news outlets that covered it. Hilarious to me. That's what took up all their time today. By the way, Farrakhan, far right. I mean, why do they classify him as being on the left at all? Wonder why. Because basically his ideology, his social beliefs, where he stands on social issues, it's all right wing. What's different about him from the guys like Alex Jones and Paul Joseph Watson and Laura Loomer? Can't put my finger on it. I can, but geez, Periscope apparently has its own little white supremacist problem going on over there. Karim jumps in, or Karim jumps in to say again and again, talk about Jew. All right. Choking on Ashes says, Matt, you are hotter than Kit Harington. Ooh, thank you. Unfortunately, I don't have Kit Harington money or fame and fortune. But Dank says, insert forced Jon Snow is short joke. Well, I'm also short, so me and Kit have that in common as well. Grim says, Brooks mentioned Doom on MR today. What did he say? Michael says, if this is not out of the purview of this podcast, please reach out to Rokahana, Mark Pocan, Pramila, Jaypal, etc. Invite them on. I would like to get into the minutia of Medicare for All policy. Nothing's out of the purview of this podcast. I'll talk about anything on this show. Yes, I do think my specialty is talking about the far right, right wing movements, conspiracy theories, especially the internet. But I mean, the past few episodes actually was in a little bit of a role talking about issues within the Democratic Party and issues more so on the progressive side of things. And we talked about Beto jumping in. We talked about young progressive activists in Texas. Talked about Bernie jumping in, obviously. We talked about Russiagate numerous times, once with the Russiagate skeptic, Aaron Mattei, once with Parker Malloy, who broke down the Mueller report with me, and how the Russiagate skeptics were right and wrong on a number of aspects. But nothing's out of the purview of this podcast. Choking on Ashes says, love TMBS. That's where I end this comment. I'll read the rest, but I need to send Michael some links, but my laptop is old and fucked up. Okay. Ayahuasca says, it's hard for me to let bad politics go on challenge when I'm drunk, but you wrote drank. Chokin brings up Ilhan Omar in Democracy Now! She's incredible. Right, she's good. Kennedy says, I told Faraday Speaks to reach out to you. He gives credit to ContraPoints. Chokin and Ash says, I don't know what chemtrails are. Oh, we'll have to do an episode on chemtrails then. Elson says, chemtrails are this really nutty story which starts with claims that the government is spewing some sort of harmful chemicals in the air whenever you see jet contrail. No, but we're going to have to do a chemtrail episode now. Misha says chemtrails are a conspiracy theory that planes carry mind control or AIDS or the flu. I heard a lot of versions. Well, we'll need to... Listen, let's stop right there on that. Now that I know that, I thought it was just a given, but why am I even thinking that? We're doing a chemtrails episode. Brett says, aliens probably do exist, but there's no evidence that they exist on Earth. We should do aliens episodes as well. Misha says, aliens probably do exist. Well, listen, I mean, if you're someone who believes that the universe is vast, and I mean, it is, but, if you believe in science and that there's things beyond Earth and the solar system and the galaxy and this universe, I think it'd be hard-pressed to not believe that. I mean, it's almost ridiculous to think we are the only life. This planet is the only one that could have life on it. I mean, but yeah, there's no proof that they existed on Earth. It's probably highly unlikely as well. I say that now, but watch some Cloverfield shit ends up happening, and, well, Kennedy says, I think they definitely exist, but I think they're probably just chilling. Well, also the idea that people automatically think they would be so much more advanced than us. Who knows, light years away in some other galaxy, there could be people who are, beings, life that are just like us, just as advanced as us, maybe perhaps even less. Why do we always assume there's some super advanced race of beings? Michael says, my general practitioner told me that Medicare paid her $80 to evaluate a patient face-to-face for a $15 cane. Talk about wasteful spending. Well, Misha says, that's believable. If we exist, it's highly probable life exists somewhere else. Right. Alcid says, there are loads of videos on YouTube where people just go out and film clouds and narrate how they are obviously secret cloudcraft because, clouds look like stuff. Right. Dank says, Kennedy needs to become a multi-platform mod. Right. Well, Kennedy, if you want to do that, I will give you the mod privileges for sure. Alcid says, intelligent extraterrestrials may exist, but they sure as hell didn't build spaceships capable of crossing all those light years to come to Earth and do stupid stuff like help build pyramids. Right. Misha says MR needs to mod Kennedy. Zarin says 46% of white people think becoming a majority-minority country will damage our culture. So, yeah, a lot of white people are terrible. Right. That's true. Kennedy says the MR chat is terrible nowadays. But what, they got something like 4,000 concurrent live stream watchers at any given time, right? Choking on Ashes says, have non-compete and Faraday Speaks on your channel. Both are former alt-right. Non-compete sounds familiar as well. Let me look that. Right. Okay, I think I'll come across this one as well. I will reach out. Brett says, I don't like a lot of white culture and I'm white. I mean, what is white culture, really? I mean, people are like American, white American culture. I'm like, what? Eating a hamburger in your backyard? I mean, what is American culture? I mean, white American culture. I really don't even, I can't. All I'm coming up with is like barbecues. 4th of July barbecues. Misha says, I don't even want to participate with MR chat half the time. Well, my goal is that one day this live stream is also so popular that, Misha, you don't want to participate in this chat either. Not because I don't want you in it, but I'll make that trade-off. Dank says, ha ha ha, from Jon Snow to Thor to homeless. Well, homeless people could be good looking too, but he specifically called me a hobo. But I think has a slightly different connotation. El Cid says, Farrakhan can't be on the right. He's black and Muslim. Right, you got it. You got what I was saying. Brian says, do you still want us to help you out with timestamps for clips? Absolutely. I honestly think I've been talking to YouTube, actually. I've gone to some off-the-record events with YouTube, speaking with YouTube. And so I can't divulge stuff. But speaking with them, and creators successful creators who've also gone to these events, it seems like while there is the hardcore live stream audience within politics YouTube, like the hardcore, like you guys, the hardcores who watched Michael Brooks live stream, the Majority Report live stream, Sam's got 500,000 YouTube subscribers and 4,000 concurrent people watching his live stream episodes. There's definitely that audience. But then even when you look at those progressive channels, Sam's standalone videos that he just uploads got like 25, 30, 40,000, 50,000 views plus. It seems like YouTubers and YouTube users as a whole prefer the uploads to the live stream. And this show is mainly a podcast, so it's harder to do that for me. Which is why I want to do those extra standalones. But also, if I could pull something from this live stream to separately upload, and you guys can help with that with sending me those timestamps, that is even a bigger help. So yeah, for sure. Long story short, send me those timestamps. El Cid says, as someone pointed out on Twitter today, right-wingers define themselves as white people who don't like black people. Therefore, a black guy who doesn't like white people can't be on the right. Right. Misha says, I took timestamp notes one time and then forgot about them. Good job, Misha. Thanks a lot. Kennedy says, yes, spill the tea on chemtrails. I will. Choking on Ashes says, does anyone know Akala or Akala? He is an incredible public intellectual. Not familiar. Is that a YouTuber? Not familiar. Dank says, I had this debate with my mom a few weeks ago. Which debate? The aliens debate or the Farrakhan debate? Chogan on Ashes says, we have more problems than aliens right now. Well, yeah, right. El Cid, the 1970s Paranormal Oddities TV series, narrated by Leonard Nimoy, In Search Of, is now on YouTube. Most episodes are nonsense, but it's great to watch as the year core of much paranormal myth-making. Brian says the thirst for Jamie is intense in MR chat. Is it real? Ugh. Not saying anything mean about Jamie, but that's still gross and sort of demeaning if it's as bad as you say. Non-compete is great. He's doing an interview with a former alt-right guy turned ANCOM right now, says Kennedy. Like right now? Like he's doing a live stream right now? Oh, look at that. He is. He's got a lot more people watching his live stream as well. Oof. Gotta have him on. Dank. To be honest, UFOs are probably a mix of natural phenomena, the feds, and aliens, maybe. speed through some of these remaining chats here, because it's about time to wrap up this episode, folks. Misha says, should we post timestamps in the comments or send them in DMs? If you're on Twitter, send them as a DM, for sure. Timestamps probably not a great part. Actually, if you do it in the YouTube comments, not the chat, the comments of the episode once it's uploaded, I think that's fine too. But in the live stream chat, it's going to get lost. But DM is preferable if you're on Twitter. Brian says it's really underestimated how important intersectional solidarity is. It's nice to talk to white people who don't want to cage people who look like me. Right, I'm sure. I mean, yeah. Dang says, keep reading. You're going to force me to read the comments? What? Kennedy says, white American culture is corn. Kennedy says, corn and guns and racism. Lord says, corn came from Native Americans. Black people made barbecue. Well, when I say barbecue, I'm thinking of, sort of like all-American grilling or whatever. The hamburgers, the hot dogs. Sort of like 1950s family. That's what I'm thinking of when I think of white American culture. Grimlock says diabetes. Oof. Choking on Ashes says Akala is a rapper, a speaker, and author. Ayuashka says people should post in the Doom Discord more often. That's also at some level my fault. I'm just not on Discord a lot. I continuously say I want to do better. I think I jump in a little bit more each time I say that and then drop the ball again. Again, we'll work on it. I think I'm going to create a Facebook group. If you're not on Facebook, okay, but I honestly think most people are on Facebook. And it's probably the easiest accessible thing. And honestly, no matter what you guys think of Facebook, and clearly, as you know from my perspective, as someone who not only has this podcast that talks about tech, I write about tech, and I'm very critical of the tech companies all around. One thing Facebook gets right is the groups. And they've been creating some real communities, and I'm in a number of them. It's good stuff. Along with the bad stuff, yes, but there's some real good stuff. And I think I'm going to create a group. And I think I'll be in there a lot more, but also do the Discord. We'll figure out a way to make it all work. Elsa says, good show, Matt. Thanks. Misha, it's true. They can't pay attention when Jamie is on camera. At least most of the comments aren't inappropriate. At least most of the comments aren't inappropriate, says Misha. Chocolate Nash is the channel for Harriet regarding feminism and intersectionality. I will grab that channel too. Another to put on the list. Dreezy says the most American white culture thing is Thanksgiving din-dins. Kennedy says, yes, Harriet is great. You guys, I don't know if you guys have realized this, but for someone who, whatever little bit of Z-list internet notoriety I have, the fact that it came from being on Majority Report on YouTube and via the podcast, you guys should know that I am not much of a podcast listener, and I'm not much of a YouTube watcher in the sense of watching YouTubers. I'm obviously on YouTube all the time, watching political videos, but when it comes to like the YouTube community, other than paying attention to where the trends are going, to just keep up with that stuff so I could cover all these stories, whether it be tech, conspiracies, politics, I'm sort of a little bit out of the loop. with the big like progressive. I honestly probably can name drop 100 off the top of my head, 100 far right conspiracy channels. Can't say the same for the progressive YouTube channels. Secular Talk, Humanist Report, obviously Young Turks, Majority Report, Michael Brooks Show, the Young Turks, different Young Turks network shows like Damage Report. There's, did I say Humanist Report? Right. There's the Rational National, right? That was one of them. I've come across him a number of times. He's got good stuff. There's the Jimmy Dore Show, of course. Tim Black. If we're talking about the leftists who we don't always agree with. Off the top of my head, that's all I could name drop, to be quite honest with you. There's Destiny, if you want to consider him a progressive YouTuber. Hassan. There's a number of good leftist podcasts who don't YouTube, which I think is a mistake. They should be YouTubing on YouTube as well. But, yeah. Sean Zone says, your articles on Mashable are great. You should promote them more. Thank you, Sean. I should. Again, terrible self-promotion. Dreezy says, bunch of cornball food plus whitewashing shitty relations with natives through lore. Chokan Nash says, we need to drop Doomed in other chats. Right. You should. Right. Absolutely. You should. Kennedy says, yeah, I've been yelling at men in the MR chat lately because they're so sexist and creepy. Elsid says, I usually listen to MR or play it on TV. Haven't noticed how bad chat might be, so I guess I'll keep ignoring it. Choking on Ash says, BreadTube is growing. Kennedy says, me too, Misha. Romo, it's not like the worst thing, but it's so frustrating. Grim says, MR is still better than TYT. MR is the best, says Dreezy. I mean, Doomed. Doomed is the best, says Dreezy. Thank you. Kenny says, yes, MR is better than TYT, but they're still good. Kenny says, TYT helped me a lot. All right. Enough of those. Kenny says, Tim Black, big yikes. Well, I was just name dropping channels I'm familiar with off the top of my head. All right. Dreezy says, Professor Wolf's economic update is great. Democracy at Work. Anna's show, No Filter, is good. Right. Yes. Anna's good. Right. Brian says, if it wasn't for Sam making Jill Stein look silly on TYT, I would have never found him. Kennedy says, yeah, I feel the same way. I don't watch them much anymore, but I still feel a sort of loyalty to them. And the final comment of the episode, TYT is from Grimlock. TYT is fine some of the time, but they didn't defend J20 resistance, including Dimmy. Oh, aka Jimmy. All right, Grim. Yes. Folks, thank you for all the great suggestions today. Thank you for the kind words. And by kind words, I'm talking about, most importantly, my looks. No, but really, everyone seemed to really enjoy this episode. My bread and butter really is these conspiracies and the far right fringe movement. But with the 2020 primaries coming around already, I sort of got sucked into this hole. And it's inevitable that I'm going to talk about it a lot because I just am obsessed with it. But you're right. Got to play to my strengths. Keep sending those. Listen, send those timestamps. Send your ideas for the show. Send your suggestions. They're not falling on deaf ears. I am considering all these things I've been asking to when it comes to these shorter episode news hits, the YouTube videos, doing all sorts of different things. I'm thinking, like for example, the Game of Thrones test stream the other day. Just little things to sort of do fun stuff with you guys. Well, I'm pooped. I'm tired. Chocolate on Ashes says he wants to know about chemtrails. Dreezy says, yeah, Matt, you look sharp today, like you shampooed your hair. Actually, I didn't. I'm on day 2 of not washing my hair. So maybe that's why I'm looking so great. Maybe I should stop washing my hair completely. All right, guys. See you. Well, when you get long hair, when you have long hair, though, and with my specific, the way my hair is and how my natural oils are, I actually can't wash my hair every day because then it looks really weird. So maybe that's it, actually. All right, folks. See you all next time on Doomed.